The price of games, rise up, stand the price, the loss of legs. My occupation, in essence, not complacent. Block the banquet, stop the computation. I'ma make the coda, fools just wanna make the quota. They can't rock around here, they need baking soda. This a hydra, no way they taking over. Lay them below the basement with snakes and cobras.
This is the INKPULP podcast.
I need last week's episode. Don't make this a thing.
I literally just sent you the link to be able to download.
Okay, good. My concern is I don't want to get episodes confused.
Yeah, no. I mean, the thing that I'm doing is dating them chronologically.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
at the very least, you'll be able to catch it like that.
Okay, that's cool. That'll work. And then I'll. You need to hold me accountable. You need all my branding and stuff for this.
I don't need it.
Well, you want it.
I think maybe you can put it on post, right?
Maybe. But if you can put it on during, it'd probably be easier because then I have to ask Alan to do something else. I was excited because once we have an intro, I told Alan we're not going to really need him much because the intro will be embedded in the episode and I can just upload it to YouTube.
It'll make things, that'll make things easier, assuming we get our shit together, quick enough that we'll actually have an intro that Alan doesn't have to worry about. But between now and then, Alan might need to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. But he should have that for me pretty soon, I think. Maybe in the next 2 or 3 episodes at the latest. I'm guessing. Although he's busy, I'm busy, you're busy.
Well, I think this is nice. I think this things worked out for a Tuesday. And you're traveling again sometime next week, so.
Yeah, I'm going Friday. Quick little trip.
Okay.
To Boston.
I'm being very mindful about this signal there's this new sort of, when you get like a Wi-Fi signal on your phone.
Yeah.
There's this thing that pops up from now and again on my end, on StreamYard, that effectively tells me how good our signal is. May or may not cut out. I don't know.
Yeah, you freeze every now and then. Today it's already seeming worse. Are really? You on? Yeah. The last couple episodes you froze a couple times, but so far you've frozen for a split second about 5 times. I would.
Hold on. I'm gonna close a window that's playing a video. Maybe that'll make things easier for us.
Are you on your Wi-Fi or are you hardwired in?
No, I'm hardwired in.
Oh, well, that is very strange. Why would you be freezing then?
Oh, I have no idea. Maybe it's just my internet. This is like, is it doing it right now? Is it freezing on you right now?
No, we're good.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you know when we do.
All right.
What were you about to say? You're about to say where you live?
No, I was just going to say, like, I wonder if that signal little icon that pops up is relevant to when I start, like, freezing or skipping or whatever.
Yeah, like now I hear some staticky thing quick, but you just froze for a second. It just happened. Did you see that? Did you see the sign?
No.
I don't know.
Maybe there's a delay between you and me.
No, because it's like going normal, and then all of a sudden you just freeze, and then you come back.
That should not be freaking happening.
It's your mutant power.
It is my inability. Yeah, it's my incompatibility with like electronics.
But you were going to say something about where you live. You don't think the internet is good where you live? Is that what you're
I don't know if it's not good, right? I think in contrast, I think it's fine, it's okay. But unfortunately, I've had the privilege of being able to get internet back when I was in LA, and that thing was like fiber, Yeah. And so it was blazing fast, right? And I had to sort of ramp down my expectations when it comes to Oregon, right?
I understand.
There's no fiber in my area. There are no plans to bring fiber up to my area. So as much as I'm paying for the sort of the kind of fastest internet that's available to me, sometimes I'm just kind of like, this is what I have to deal with.
Yeah.
And it becomes really relevant when I'm streaming, you know? So there you go. And we're doing a version of that right now as we talk.
Exactly.
This is not as interesting as you seeing red while you were at the airport.
That was something.
That was significant.
That was a day.
Amazing.
It was a lesson, Eric. It was a lesson.
Yeah. Well, you walked away with a learning moment, I think.
Yeah, I did. Oh, I definitely did. But you have a good. I was thinking about this earlier today. You have a very, I don't know what the right word is, good ability, or you're very well wired to, when things don't go well, pivot and adjust and adapt and look for a lesson. Have you always been like that?
No, I don't think I was. I was, brought up by a single parent who was always, my mom was always stressed out because, she had to pull double duty in raising me as a mom and, in part as a role model for a non-existent father. But she was always on the high, not always, that's unfair. She was often on the high end of being overly cautious.
Okay.
Right, because number one, she was pulling double duty. Number two, we didn't come from a very well off place, right? Limited income, single parent, 2 jobs, right? So if anything ever came down the pipe that would require medical attention, that would be devastating financially, right?
Right.
If there was anything that would require extracurricular financial contribution, where there would be like summer camp or something, and who knows what could happen in summer camp. My mom would always be overly cautious. So that kind of rubs off on you. I oftentimes joke with my wife where when I see the little needle on the fuel tank of the car, drop somewhere near quarter tank, which, by the way, between quarter tank and like empty tank, you can go a long way.
Yeah, a very long way.
But whenever I do that, a bit of anxiety kicks in, and I'd always thought, like, where's that come from? And it's from my mom, right? Because my mom would never let that needle drop past a quarter tank, much less an eighth of a tank, So that kind of stuff was instilled in me, and there's still carry over to this day. And then there's still a part of me that's like, will worry about something that I know I can't do anything about, but that's also the mechanism that allows me to sort of like, oh, okay, and just shrug, right? I don't know of too many situations out there, especially ones that I've personally run into, where it's so catastrophic that there's no point of recovery. It may be annoying and painful and sort of whatever in the moment, or however long it takes to resolve itself. But in as far as not being able to pivot and sort of solve it, or it ends up solving itself, I've never run into that. So that's
a new skill.
Yeah, relatively.
And how did you develop that skill? Is it something you intentionally worked on? Or did life...
You get to a point where if you end up stressing about everything, right? Like you're just always at a flight response,
right?
Or at a fight response, and it's exhausting being in that space. Exhausting, and I see it in my wife all the time, where she takes a lot of cues from me, but she doesn't have quite a handle on it yet, and so she'll go into this space where. She'll go into spaces of probability, even possibility, and just think about it over and over and over and over again. Where I go, that hasn't even happened yet.
Right. Right.
And it's not even an exercise of like, ooh, maybe I should bring a jacket because I know it's going to be cold, right? Which, oh, I know it's going to be cold, therefore I should bring a jacket, because that makes sense to me. That's sort of like like this sort of anxiety math, where you're like, it's going to be cold.
Anxiety
with
math.
a system. Yeah, you came up with a what do you call it? With a solve, right? It's almost like coming up with these probable, possible scenarios, but not necessarily coming up with a solve for it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I live with a very similar tempered person, so I'm very much in tune with that.
Yeah, and then another thing is that I think if I conduct myself with a level of confidence, it has a tendency to be a button that I can press in those occasions.
And it works?
Yeah. For the most
that's
part.
awesome.
There's times when I lose my cool, absolutely. I'm not
sure.
But there are times when I just go like, oh, yeah, don't worry. I'm not going to.
And she responds to that?
Oh, no, she does not.
Oh, okay.
Definitely does not. I'm talking about in like situations that I'm in, where I go like in the situation, like put in the similar situation as you, when you were sort of, you couldn't figure out exactly what happened, right? I often ask myself, have I done everything that I can to help remedy the situation? If the answer is yes, right, then everything else is out of my hands,
Right. Absolutely.
So I'm going to go through the checklist of like, okay, I'm going to call, the promoters. I'm going to talk to I'm going to talk to these guys at the TSA. I'm going to talk to blah, blah, blah. And then at some point I just go like, okay.
I've been more of that mind lately. I've learned to do that over the past couple of years. That's why this day it was like old me.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it.
I think it's difficult when you've built up, you become so familiar with that version of yourself that it's easy to fall back into that space. It's literally like a groove in your brain of programming that it's easy to occupy,
Right.
So anyway.
But I was able to let it go. I mean, once I got into Toronto, the next day
I mean, I can think about it now because it's a story being told to me, but in the moment, I can't exactly predict how I would react. I would hope that, that I'm just like, whatever, I go through my problem solving and
Yeah, I'll be better next time.
Nice.
I've learned that.
Prove yourself to me.
Maybe I'll be put to the test this Friday.
Yeah.
So, I had a topic for today.
What was the topic? By the way, am I responsible for coming up with these topics as well? I think I didn't want to put the whole burden on you.
Oh, I don't. I mean, I figure if we're both thinking on it, cool. But if not, it's cool too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if something strikes you, let's talk about it.
Sure.
And yeah, it would be great maybe it'd be cool if we each had like a topic for each show and we did a half and half thing.
We do really well by just talking on the one thing. We just let the
exactly.
We let the organic nature of the conversation get into it.
That's true.
Anyway,
so being that we do want to talk craft sometimes, I've wondered something when it comes to you. You've spent a lot of time studying storytelling and practicing storytelling and storyboarding, and I've seen you watch different podcasts that dissect film and storytelling in that realm. And when you do your comics, it's evident how strong of a storyteller you are. But you don't read much comics these days, correct?
No, very, very little. And this may be too harsh. It's not maybe. It is too harsh. I'll say it anyway.
Yeah, say it.
Which is, I think there's a lot of, just based on the handful that I've read, and I'm not by any means as much of a comic book reader as I was a decade ago, 2 decades ago. I don't buy everything. I buy the things that I'm like, oh, I think I'll be interested in that. And then there's somewhere I'm like, whoa, that's really well done. That's really well put together. But from a panel to panel, I think like there needs to be emphasis put on this craft more. Right. I think there's a handful of people who clearly take it very seriously, but there's also this general sort of like, this'll do because it's done. if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense.
Right?
I agree
It's
with
rendered.
you 100%.
It's, maybe there's a background, maybe there's not, and it's like, okay, I guess that's what makes up for a comic. But in the time that I really took, learning how to do sequential storytelling seriously, and it's not to say that it's not serious now, but it's a different version now, But back then, when I was like, I was trying to figure it out.
I'm gonna be harsher than you. I think the craft is suffering. I do. I don't think it's different. I mean, yes, it's different, but I think it's not been respected and treated with respect in most mainstream published situations.
Why do you think that is?
My theories, these are guesses. I can't even say the theories. My guesses are a few things. One, editorial staff. Yeah. They're not trained in it.
Sure.
They don't know it. They don't know what to look for in it.
Yeah.
There used to be a position at both publishing houses, Marvel and DC. There was someone on staff, like Michael Golden, I believe, was at Marvel. Joe Kubert was at DC, I believe. And their job was to wean new talent on these anthology books. They taught them the craft there. So there was a standard that was introduced to new talent that the editorial staff would then uphold. Yeah. I think that's gone. Well, I don't think. I know that's gone. There's no one in those positions now.
Sure.
Secondly, my guess is this is due to I feel like at DC and Marvel, they feel very desperate in their trying to survive. There feels like get a gimmick, get it out, make a sale.
Sure.
And there's no emphasis on the quality of said gimmick. And I also think right now with what's happening with the writers at these publishing houses who are looked at as the controllers of the book. I mean, it's so bad to the point where my last experiences were the editor was acting below the writer. And these aren't writers who are coming in understanding the craft of comics. I think that is something that is missing too. And that goes back to it wasn't just new artists that were trained in storytelling, it was new writers. And I had a long conversation with James Robinson about this because Archie Goodwin was in charge of him as a new writer and taught him the craft. And when I worked on a James Robinson script, it was obvious that here's someone who understands the craft of storytelling, the art of storytelling, the real estate of a comic book page, and not just how to use it clearly, but how to play with it in interesting artistic ways. And aside from a few writers, David Lapham being one, James Robinson being another, I found every script I got, I was the problem solver. That was my job. I was not the storyteller. It was now make this work. I mean, I remember one of my last books I was on at Marvel. It was such a mess. It took me, I remember I'd always schedule myself 3 days to thumbnail a book, and this one took me a week and a half. Because every time I'd get to somewhere later down the line, I'd realize, oh, well, this wasn't accounted for back there, and I'd have to do and readjust over and over and over. The editor didn't pay attention to any of it or didn't know to what to look for. So I think all of that. And then I think we're also financially, I think the artists are so strapped and under so much deadline pressure that just the emphasis is get it done. And whether or not they know how to tell a story, it's just get it done. And I think that's where we are, and I think that's why.
Yeah, I think everything that you said just compounds into a space of like, maybe not. Yeah, it's maybe it's not even purposefully not caring about the craft, but it accidentally you end up not caring about it because you're just trying to.
It's just not
get
important.
It out the door. Yeah. And I think a lot of it, to the examples that you gave, there were people put in those spaces who actually cared about the craft of not just writing, but obviously writing for a comic book, which is a different gear that you have to engage, in my opinion, right? I've seen a comic book script versus an animation script versus a, feature film script versus I've seen scripts across the board, right? And comic book scripts are different enough so that you understand that it's written for a comic book script, not just in this description, but clearly because of its pacing. You know,
Right.
The level of deliberateness that you need to have, either in the narrative, in the words, and the stuff that's happening on the page of the script, or the level of deliberateness that you need to have with your art, so that you can communicate the right things, right? I think it needs to be so much more dialed in with comics because of the limited real estate, because of the limited time that you have. So you need to be that much more on point about what does this scene mean? What is the audience getting out of this scene that without it, they would not. It didn't move the story along. Does that make sense? Comics right now is full of fat, just like unnecessary, exposition. The writers think that it's like character, but it's not. It's just like annoying tendencies, where you're like, that doesn't give me insight into their character. That just gives me an insight on the stuff that they're saying. Right. It doesn't give me like, oh, I know that person is very protected in the way they interact with people. I know that they have like trust issues or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's missing. But purely from the art standpoint, purely from the craft standpoint, I think when you lower the bar on one side, which is the narrative and the writing, you accidentally lower the bar on the other side as well. And I think maybe
that's interesting.
They're under duress when it comes to like trying to get this stuff done and out in a month, which I don't even know if that's, if a monthly book is not all that relevant anymore. You
just described the last 5 years of me working as an artist for Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
I didn't want to lower. I fought. I literally fought. I worked myself to hell to do my best to make, and no matter what I did, there just wasn't the time to bring it to the level I really wanted to ever. So it suffered, but I fought a valiant fight. Along the way.
So you get it's a chain reaction. You know what I mean? It's like it's clear that when a writer, a story is super delicious. You read it and you go like, whoa, I cannot wait. I am looking forward to that set of panels, that X amount of set of sequential pages, because that scene is just going to be amazing. Whether it be action, whether it be talking, it's like really profound, So as an artist, you build for the thing that's being asked of you, right? And if you're not being asked to do much, there's no reason to hone that craft.
Right, it's true.
You know what I mean? You're just asked to draw the characters on model in your style, because obviously that's what got you in the door, or partly what got you in the door. You kind of draw just enough so that people have an understanding of proximity to each other, and then leave just enough room for the word bubbles. You know what I mean? And it's
if they can do that, even
right. But let's say those. But those are, to me, those are just like I don't know, man. Those are just like the most cosmetic way of approaching comics, because it can be so much more in a sense that comics is a bit more. It's less passive than a movie where information is being delivered to you. It's more active, and therefore, just by proxy, people have to kind of stop and look at the thing that they're reading, and understand it in context. If there's a bubble there or a caption there, or if there isn't any of the dialogue in there, they have to understand what the picture is and what it means.
Right.
And that, to me, it's clear that's not as important as it once was, where I'm not a stickler by any means of like doing old school storytelling. I say to be relevant in this space, you have to kind of like amend or adjust yourself so that, this is how they have panel layouts now, That's not really my point. My point is like, are we clear with what you're trying to say? Right. I opt for clarity in whatever capacity that you decide to execute that thing, whether it be like some weird, page layout or panel layout. As long as it's clear, I'm into it, because that's part of my job, is to handhold the reader through the experience and the narrative, right? I'm doing the reader a disservice if I don't do that. I'm doing the story and the writer a disservice if I don't do that. So I don't know if that's emphasized anymore, at least on it's being de-emphasized accidentally, because you take a mediocre editorial staff that are unprepared to be able to deal with like just basic storytelling. They almost defer to the artist as opposed to having an eye out for themselves. And then you put them under the gun of like kind of trying to get these books out monthly. It's really tough. I can't imagine the daily responsibilities and stresses that they go through. My counter to that is, it's the fucking job that you signed up for, Right. So giddy up, like you asked for that job, go do that job well at the very least,
For sure. For sure.
So as far as me, I mean, like, I really love storytelling. I really love composition and juxtaposition and subtext and context,
Yes.
So I love that. And so anytime that I am missing that when I'm reading through a comic, it just feels like this weird, empty experience.
Yeah, I'm very much.
Yeah, sometimes I even dismiss the actual craft of the drawing. I look at the drawing and I'm like, that's a little janky. Far be it for me to be overly critical about that. My drawings are pretty janky, but as long as it communicates the thing that you want me, the emotion that you want me to be in when I see it, I'm on board, man. You can draw amazing, super simple storyboard like figures on the comic, but when it's done well, I'm like, I get it. I know what I'm talking. It's actually emoting to me. And on that point, like some people, artists now, I think they've forgotten how important it is to make their characters act.
Yeah.
Right. Acting somehow has been diminished to the point where it's almost like emoji levels of like acting.
Yeah. Do you feel, as you said that, I started wondering, do you feel, I also feel that is true of cartooning, and I almost feel like the two go hand in hand, like really great acting in a drawing involves cartooning.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it has to be this like a Looney Tunes looking cartoon, but it involves a certain level of exaggeration that crosses into a cartooning realm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think...
And I feel like cartooning is suffering right now.
Yeah, I think so too. But I mean, it's not that it's widespread. I think that it's on select things that are getting premier eyeballs, for the lack of a better term, right? Premier attention. Right.
Yeah.
And then you go like, that's supposed to be the exemplary... the exemplary books that are going to represent an industry,
right?
And yet they don't do an exemplary job. I can't imagine trying to walk a modern mainstream artist through Dark Knight and having them be like, "Oh, I understand this nuance."
Right.
I understand why these two panels were set up this way, or why there's a 9-panel grid as opposed to like, 3 panels that are weirdly juxtaposed on top of each other. You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand. I don't think I can have somebody. I don't think there's enough artists out there, and this is really sort of pessimistic and negative, but I don't know of too many that can walk me through convincingly why those shots were chosen that way. And those were deliberate. Those weren't like accidental,
Right.
So yeah, I don't know too many of them that I can trust to be like, oh, you know why that shot works. You know why these shots in sequence, side by side, and then pages, 34, 35, 36, why they work this way,
Right. Right. And this is getting closer to what the end part of the question.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a few questions I do want to address. What comics stood out to you coming up, and what comics stand out to you now, no matter when they were made, that spoke to you on a storytelling level? Like which comics do you look at that are like, this is the craft of storytelling at its peak in comics?
Crap, what a great question. Well, I thought that the first Sin City was pretty profound.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. I thought Sin City was pretty dang profound in a way that I had never thought comics could be done that way. Right? I don't know. It was so bold, and it took me away from my understanding of like, this is what makes comics good, right?
Right.
Like, I don't know if Kingdom Come had come out then. I was blown away by the way, like that's elevating a form in the craft side of things, you know?
Kingdom Come?
But as a Kingdom Come, yeah.
Okay.
But as a whole package, I thought that Sin City did a really, really good job of like not just narrative, obviously in layout, and it didn't before they started doing like the whole what do you call it? I don't know. It's like this bells and whistles of they would put like a splash of color on everything, which I thought like what a weird gimmick, you know? The first one where it was just all black and white and you had to like make that style work.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And he did. And I thought, wow, what a perfect you understood the tone and texture of the story that they were trying to that Frank Miller was trying to tell. And then he wraps it around this style that's so complementary to it. Right. And then like he draws the things that he needs to draw in order to land, which is the what do you call it? Which is an amazing exercise of just drawing the essential things for you to understand what it was, you know, and sort of let your mind fill in the rest of it. Right.
Right.
So to me, I'd never thought of comics like that. I'd been a stickler for like, hey, if that's a whatever, it's like a sidewalk in Los Angeles, it should look like a sidewalk in Los Angeles. And Frank Miller is like, okay, I'm going to take a snapshot of what that sidewalk looked like and how do I communicate that in as few elements as possible. Not detail per se, right? But just like elements, you know?
Right.
And that to me was great. So
I see that what you just explained. I think he got that from Will Eisner.
Sure.
Because that's what I got from Will Eisner.
Sure.
Was this element of like Will Eisner's work always said to me, let's treat this scene as a stage play, not a movie. So you can put a bed, a night table, and a lamp. I mean, a side table and a lamp together. And you've got a bedroom.
Yeah.
And because Will Eisner did talk a lot about how he studied the art of stagecraft and putting just enough stuff in to create the illusion of an environment.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And so, I go, you know, like I had never had an appreciation for somebody who was like hyper detailed, like a Jeff Darrow type. I had appreciation for them from a technical standpoint. Like on my best day, eating the right sort of cereal and getting the right amount of sleep, I could never draw that much, right? But when it came to like I never had an appreciation for him as a storyteller. And not to say that he's a poor one. I just thought that there was just so much to look at. It took me out of being immersed in that comic. And so people were like, well, the immersion is sort of like looking through all of that detail, appreciating that style and, you know, how it impacts the narrative. I'm like, cool, I guess it's just not the thing that I look for.
Right. Do you feel like with someone like Darrow, you're looking at the narrative isn't what's important in the storytelling. It's what the world he immerses you in, and Jeff Darrow. Like you look at something like Shaolin Cowboy, for example, which is beautiful and very fun to look at. But in terms of a narrative, there's nothing really there. So it's just this visual experience of like going through a Jeff Darrow's mind.
And
that's fun.
Yeah, it is. It's not to diminish the sort of, again, the masterful craft that goes behind drawing those amazing drawings that he draws. But if we're going to talk about what constitutes for a good comic, in my opinion, it's not necessarily that. Detail isn't it. And yet I'll go and draw detail anyway, you know?
What about when you were a kid? Do you ever look back at the books that excited you, like the 80s and early 90s comics? Do you look at them now and are they Have you looked at them, and are they hard to enjoy
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. And I looked at Simonson's. I have that black and white artist edition that Simonson did for Thor.
Oh, wow.
And seeing those things in their original, in its sort of, before, as they got turned into the editor, right? Because it's effectively a scan of the original pages. I don't know how those guys did it, but it's beautiful, And number one, just the penmanship of somebody like that, right? Like the person who can control that. I think it's a combination of brush and like a chisel, you know what I mean? Like a calligraphy pen. Gorgeous stuff, right? Clearly it comes from I think it comes from an advertising background. It feels like that. And so to see that, not just in that level, which is the art, sort of the making of, right, the nuts and bolts part, but to see it sort of like, oh, these pages really feel like a superhero comic book. And that, by the way, is super subjective. Like, who's to say that what I think of a superhero comic book is how superhero comic books should be.
Right.
But it certainly felt like you're in for an adventure, right? That's a little sticky because, again, that's subjective, like you wouldn't believe. And it's
sure, but I mean, I think we were conditioned in reading them to get that sensation.
Yeah, and the pacing was there too. Again, that doesn't go into the art part, but the pacing was there to just really super compressed storytelling. Whereas these days things get so decompressed, where you're like, gosh, this entire book didn't necessarily move the plot, didn't give us new information. It just gave us whatever deconstruction that they had in mind,
Right.
So, and I heard somebody say, or actually somebody wrote me after I reached out to them and said, what do you think about Arc Athena 1, right? And they were old school X-Men fans, and forgive me if I told this story before, but they were old school X-Men fans. And they said, so I was really nervous about them coming back and being like, I don't know, Eric, but...
Well, okay, before you go into that, just back up real quick. And that was a big inspiration for you in doing Arc Athena, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily the set of locks that I decided to open, but it's inevitable. If I'm going to do a superhero team book, it's almost impossible to get away from this stuff that I was brought up on, which is Uncanny X-Men, Right. So it's not as if I was sitting there going like, ooh, what did they do in Mark Silvestri's run and during the Inferno, blah, blah, blah. It was more like I'm trying to capture without looking directly at the books, reading directly the issues themselves, to be like, what did that make me feel and how do I replicate it, knowing what I know now, right?
Right.
And so with that in place, I sent it out to somebody and I said, like, read this, and fully expecting them to be like, I don't know about this,
Yeah.
And they said, Eric, it's actually, I had to switch my brain to read this kind of story. And I was like, whoa, what does that mean? And they put it in perfect context, which is stories now are being written so deconstruction style, so slow, that when I'm reading Arc Athena and there's so much information in each page, it can be almost overwhelming, but I know where it comes from. It's from that old school style of storytelling where you only have so much real estate. And so I took that as a compliment, right?
Okay.
And so, yeah, that to me was I think the perfect way to sort of capture the stuff that I grew up on, right? Again, not being immediately referential to them, but definitely sort of just like in the spirit of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is to follow up on the other one. Being that a big influence on you was 80s X-Men, is that what we're talking about? Late 80s?
Maybe 80s, yeah. Definitely Jim Lee, so that's got to be...
Okay. Do you
late 80s, early 90s?
Do you now, with the knowledge you have now, have you looked back at, say, like the Jim Lee X-Men, and what do your more critical eyes do with that, or are you just does the nostalgia knock that out?
I haven't looked at a Jim Lee comic book, at least that X-Men run of his, with a critical eye. I haven't. I mean, again, I think it's by design that I didn't, just so I don't end up doing some of the things that they were doing in that book, right? So, But if I were to go through it again, I bet you there's a handful of things that wouldn't stand up as far as like the craft is concerned, you know? Or at the very least, actually, that might not be very fair. I think the more fair thing to say is that it wouldn't probably align to the way I would do that shot.
Okay.
You know? So there may be things where I'm like, oh, that jumped to 180, or it would be so much clearer as to what's going on in the bubble and what you need, the story that you need to tell right now. It'd be so much clearer if you just did this, because I often opt for like a boring version of clarity.
Right. So, other than INKPULP instruction, what resources do you recommend, or that were helpful to you to help you understand how to be a better storyteller? Were there any books, or I mean, like, there's a
book that's called, and this was actually, it was not necessarily even. Well, actually, you didn't phrase it like that. You didn't frame the question that what kind of things, what resources did I have that I get into that made me into a better storyteller? I think one of the best things that could have ever happened to me was fail so miserably at comics that I had to go back into animation. And the only job that was available to me was a storyboard artist, you know, because I came out of animation going into mainstream comics. I was an environment designer, right? And so that was like, I really loved doing that stuff. It was, I could do it in my sleep. It was a lot of fun. I'd done a lot of, you know, behind the scenes / ghost work / sort of freelance, but I never got credit for it. For that, you know, back the X-Men cartoon from way back in the day.
Oh, okay.
That's so my career got that my animation career got a start in that space. I started becoming more and more known as the guy who I was doing assists for, and when that guy sort of fell through on a job, they reached out to me, and off we go, you know. And so I left animation, sort of like burning the bridge on the way out.
Oh no.
And when I was humbled because I couldn't hack it as a comic book artist, I went back. And thankfully, a friend of mine was kind enough to bring me on. But he said, Eric, I can't bring you on as an environment designer because there's no positions for that. But I've seen the comic books that you've been doing, and I'm super impressed by them. How about if I train you as a storyboard artist?
Okay.
And they did. You know, and so that's when I really started learning the ropes of like, hey, that's a cool comic booky shot, but that's not a very good cinematic shot because you lose the audience. It's unclear. We don't set up the premise so, you know, super early so that people understand what they're looking at, you know? And really, it was due to like, you know, 3 people. One was Peter Chung, who was the creator and executive producer of a show called Aeon Flux for MTV. Jay Oliva, who now currently works for Zack Snyder's company, but before that, he and I worked on the Masters of the Universe cartoon in 2003, 2004. And then thereafter, the person that honed it all in, like Peter showed me how to pick interesting angles. Jay showed me how to like chain action together, not just like punching action, but like talking and going through space and delivering, you know, narrative, blah, 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 right? An exposition. And then Sam Liu, who's a director over at Warner Brothers, took all of that raw material and said, okay, you have the pieces that I need. And so working with him on the Batman was really sort of this formative time for me to be like, right, I think I'm pretty confident in picking the right shots from here on down. You know, to each director, they're going to have their nuances, so things would inevitably get changed. But
you're talking about the Batman cartoon called The Batman, the one
Batman,
that
Jeff Matsuda did character designs for.
Right.
And so from there, I kind of, you know,
you storyboarded on that show.
I did, yeah. And I didn't know. Well, the thing was, we were sort of, I don't know if this is true, but we felt like we were seen as this sort of like, you know, this offshoot bastard stepchild, you know, because we were under the roof of Bruce Timm and the original Batman animated series. So there was always this pall, you know, this shadow that was over us, you know. But coming out of that, I think I had done enough sort of like impressive work that the directors started talking amongst themselves. And that's when I was brought on to, that's when I was almost like graduation day, I got brought up to the third floor of the animation building in Burbank, and that's when I started working on Justice League.
Okay.
And that was directly under Bruce Timm. That was, through his specific lens of how he saw that world. And to me, that helped me sharpen up even more, because whereas Sam was a very specific directing style, which I think is phenomenal, I think exemplary. Anybody who's ever had an opportunity to work under Sam who end up going storyboarding someplace else, he's basically released them out in the world with like the skills and the toolkit to succeed and excel. Working under Bruce, that's when I picked up speed. Right, I was super slow with Sam, but when I got on Justice League, just the nature of that show, not because of the grueling schedule, but because of the style that they developed for it, it made it so easy and fun to draw. Everything was almost gestural, so it made it easy to set up a shot and just be like, "Does this work? No. Does this work? No. Does this?" And finally something will stick, and you're like, "That feels really, really good." And then when you have somebody like a Bruce Timm at the helm, right? And with my director, who I worked with very closely back then, was a director by the name of Dan Riva, who goes all the way back to the original Batman. Dan had his chops in as far as like, Eric, we can tighten this up by doing this shot instead. So it came from a very, I think, very sort of celebrated, experienced pedigree, that entire crew.
Did you spend a lot of time one-on-one with Bruce where he was teaching you things?
I'll tell you a small little story. It's an offshoot and an anecdote, and I'm very proud of it, but also it's like, I don't want to pat myself too much on the back, but because I think he was genuinely taking it easy on me. So the first board that I did for him in Justice League, I think it had something to do with Dead Man, that character with the acrobat with a high high collar. So I remember that was the first board that I ever did for Dan, and the way the process worked was that I would storyboard for Dan, hand it in, X amount of weeks late, a couple of weeks later, he would go through it. That's the rough hand in. You'd go through it, make notes, and you go and clean it up, right? And then Bruce gets a pass, like he goes into his office, looks at the animatic because that's how they'll assemble it. He gets a pass, he makes notes, and so on and so forth, right? And then it gets handed back down to you. Or if you've already moved on to the next episode, if there's a revision, storyboard revision crew, it gets handed out to them to execute Bruce's notes, right? Like the final notes before it goes and gets sent overseas for animation. So I remember turning in my boards to Dan, and Dan was very gracious with me in like making sure the shots made sense and understanding the style, because it was my first board there. I didn't really know their thing. Like every show has a feel, right? Of how they shoot their compositions and so on, how they shoot their actions. And I turned it in, and I was like, whoo, I get a couple of days before the next script gets handed out. And I remember walking into the office, and Dan is like, I think he left a note on my desk that basically says, "Hey, come and see me. Bruce saw the storyboards." And I was like, oh crap, what the
were you shitting your pants?
Yeah, I was like, what the heck? It's Bruce Timm, right? And then I walk into Dan's office and I said, "Hey Dan, what's going on? Is everything okay?" And he's like, "No, Bruce just just said, hey, we need to go look at Canete's storyboards, blah 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 blah," and I think this is the only person in that crew that they called by the last name. It's so weird. It made it so much more military and like official, but whatever. It's like, you need to take a look at Canete's boards or whatever. And I was like, "Dan, did I do it wrong? Did I mess up really badly?" And he goes, "I don't know, Eric. It's rare that I think it was Dan. Forgive me if Dan hears this later. It's like, I never said that, but I remember him saying like, Bruce rarely goes over somebody's boards this early in the morning or something like that. But I suspect it has a lot to do with his schedule and how busy his calendar can get in a given day. So there I was, so this time with Bruce opens up, and he's got that corner office, you know what I mean? Like, and you hear stories about Bruce being Bruce, There's this one where, one of the artists, one of the character designers had an idea for a character and started going next to his door. And I guess Bruce saw his shadow under the door, that little space beneath the door. And before they could even knock on the door, Bruce goes, not right now. And the guy just like backed away from the door, you know? So you hear these stories of a very intimidating Bruce Timm, and, you know, rightfully so. I think the show doesn't look as good as that if you didn't have a person at the helm who had a vision, and clearly a little bit off is a little off. You know, I experienced the same with Jay, experienced the same with Sam, and I experienced the same with Peter Chung. So it's you know, part and parcel for people who are, you know, the examples of what it means to be in those positions. Anyway, I go into his office and I have my I have a steno pad ready and my pen. I'm just ready to take notes. I'm like, whatever you say, I'm going to take notes. I'm not going to be the guy that like fights for a shot. I'm not going to be like, actually it makes sense to do this and this, and you know what I mean? I'm not going to be that guy. This is the first time I'm working with you.
Right.
Yeah, and this is the first time I'm working with you. I want to learn what's you know, how to do your show correctly, you know? I sit there, I'm ready, and he plugs in. They used to have these 3/4 tapes where they built, you know, this is all before digital, right? So they had these 3/4 inch, you know, video, whatever, plugs it into the machine. And he's like, hey, Eric, nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, thanks for making time, and we're going to go over this thing, and I'll give you notes, whatever, you know? And he starts going over, and this is a 7-minute section, right, of which I storyboard, because you know, in a 30-minute episode, there's 21 minutes in a 21 minutes per episode, leaving room for commercial, right? Mm-hmm. So it's 7 minutes of my section, and he like pauses, right near the beginning, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a fucking long day, you know, like he's
expecting like, the bloodbath.
I'm just because he did it so quickly. You know what I mean? Like right at the beginning, he pauses the tape right away, hits the button on the remote.
We're gonna be here for a while.
And I'm like, oh, he's gonna make notes on everything. It's okay. It's all right. It's my first one. Let me learn as much as I can. And so he would pause and he goes, look, see here. Like he'd point at a certain section that I thought, okay, I'm ready. I got the pen, and I'm like, note 1, you know. Right. And then he goes, wait, hold on a second, and he lets it run, right? And he goes, oh no, that's okay. That's fine. And then we get to another one where he's like, this part right here, and he pauses it again, and he goes, actually, you know what? Let me just let it run. And it runs again. He's like, actually, that works. That's totally okay, right? And by the end of it, might have been like 45 minutes worth of this sort of like, I may have taken like 7 notes of like how to make something a little bit better, adjust a shot so that it frames the character a little bit better or whatever. And I left, and his office is maybe 2 doors down, 3 doors down away from my director, and Dan is sitting there at his doorway like a you know, like a puppy going like, what happened, you know? And so he gave me 7 notes, and he's like, are you kidding? I thought that would have been that could have been so much worse. You know, like I was expecting worse because he stopped it at like 7 seconds, 10 seconds in. And he goes, what happened? I go, he just let it run and it worked. And Dan was like, see, I told you, you just let it run. Just let it run. Just watch the whole thing. Don't look at it in the storyboard, because the storyboard is like, you know, if you're not used to your style, you're going to see something and you're like, that doesn't work. But when you see it running cinematically, it's going to work. And I was like, oh, thank God Dan fixed everything. You know, because I couldn't have gone through that review without him beating me up.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that to me was sort of, you know, feet in the cold. Right? Let's go be on Bruce Timm's show and do this right. And to me, that gave me not just the storytelling chops, but also the confidence to be able to be like, I know what this shot needs based on the script. Now, the opposite end of the spectrum is that there was an atrium or like a little eating area in the middle of the Warner Brothers building, and it was the afternoon that Bruce was going through my boards, and again, everything was still being done traditionally on paper, right? And we were all at lunch, and I was looking out into the atrium, and I could tell it was my work that he was looking at, and he was just like post-it after post-it after post-it, just like with a big red marker,
just hammering it,
redrawing, you know, in the simplest sort of like hunograph, what the new composition and the new shot should be. And I remember banging on the glass, going, "Don't kill my babies," you know. But yeah, no, I mean, from there, it was animation that basically gave me the idea of like, how do you do this in the strongest composition in the clearest way possible? Now, there's times when I still get lost in the weeds a little bit when I'm drawing, but really, animation set me up for the best version of the version of how I think storytelling should go in comics now, with adding that comics flair, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of book or
You're gonna refer back to frickin' INKPULP again, right?
no?
You're gonna refer back to your classes again.
I'm asking a serious question. is I mean, yeah. Other than INKPULP instruction, Eric, is there a book that you would recommend to someone wanting to learn and hone their craft as a storyteller better?
Yeah. There's a blue. I don't know who the author is. I've since forgotten, but there was a book called Shot by Shot. It's blue.
Yep.
On the cover. Brilliant book.
I have it.
Yep. That's the one. Blue book, Shot by Shot, film directing. Yep.
Okay. That was it. That was my question. Just because someone's going to ask, like, what can I do? How can I learn to be a better storyteller? And it's good to offer that to them.
Yeah, and the other thing is just like watch, and I know this is subjective, but just like watch really good movies. You know, the two that I recommend, and they're old, so you're going to roll your eyes at the pacing and roll your eyes at even me suggesting it because it seems pretentious, but it's really it was super helpful for me. One was Casablanca.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one.
And then the other one was, well, everyone's going to say Citizen Kane, but I didn't get much out of that movie.
No, other than pretty camera angles.
Yeah, it's really done well. But Casablanca is like composition, like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then,
are you going to say the Maltese Falcon?
No, I'm not that tired, Shawn.
No, I thought that was a really well done movie.
I'm giving you a hard time. What is the movie? Shoot, the title escapes me right now. With Faye Dunaway and Jack Nicholson. Not the Two Jakes, was just the follow up to
Chinatown.
Chinatown.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, Chinatown.
That was Polanski.
Was it? I don't even remember.
John Huston was in it, but didn't direct it. I think. Why can't I remember this? I think it's either I sound like an idiot or I'm amazing. I think
that's all right. Point is, go watch those movies. Go watch the composition. Understand the subtext, which is actually understand the context of the shots, which is really super important. Why they chose that particular shot for the context, and then once you get into like the more the conversational sections, understand the subtext. Subtext is like, what do they really mean? What are they really trying to get at with this scene? What are they trying to lay on pretty thick so that you feel it not just visually but emotionally? Subtext is so super important.
I remember when you came to SCAD when I was teaching there and you were lecturing on this and you used Heat as an example.
Yeah, there's a specific scene in Heat, and I can go through it again.
In the diner.
Narrative. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that was a good one.
I don't know how many times that I've used that as an example, but that's great.
Yeah. Now, when I was at your house last, you were listening to some podcast that was breaking down a film. I don't remember if it was an industry podcast or a craft podcast, but it was. Do you remember? Do you know at all what I'm talking about?
I don't, man. I go through so many.
It was on YouTube, and it was really pretty. I mean, really high def, really well done. All right. That was just.
Do you remember what was on? Do you remember what was on the screen? What it was about?
Shit, I want to say it was that Christopher Nolan movie, Interstellar.
Oh shoot.
But I might be wrong.
Nothing comes to mind. So,
all right.
I don't want to drag us down in memory lane stuff, you know.
All right. Well, cool. Well, we're at an hour anyway, and that was awesome. Like, I want to jump up and down, and like that was awesome. That was a good one. You had some great stories and good talks.
Yeah, buddy. What was I gonna say? Well, I guess we'll end it there. I'll hit the end broadcast button, and I promise I'll upload this to the folder in which you should be able to have access. If not, easy enough to request it, and I'll just hit yes.
Yeah, hit end, and then we'll talk.
Yeah, okay. Also, next time I get to ask you questions, man. It can't just be all about me. All right,
that's fine.
Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye.
INKPULP podcast. This is the INKPULP podcast. Comics, hip hop, life.